Oh hey, and welcome to the start of a new kind of vlog for me. I've done weekly reading vlogs since I think last summer, and those have definitely been a lot of fun, and I really want to continue vlogging. It'll pretty much be the same setup at least until I'm back in my apartment in Arlington, which hopefully can happen before too long. So it'll still be the same style of me just checking in here in my room, and that's just how it's going to be vlog-wise for now. But I wanted to start to either theme my vlogs, maybe based on random tarot cards that I draw from Fairy Loot. I've got just a prompt on each one and I can just draw a random prompt. Or if there's some other idea that I have that I want to theme or structure a vlog around, then I kind of wanted to go in that direction. That way it's a bit clear what I'm actually going to be talking about or reading in a particular vlog, at least somewhat, and it can just be a bit of fun, either add some randomness to what I read, a little bit of mystery to what I read, or just I can have it be clear about what I'm going to be talking about for people who are just kind of seeing the title and the thumbnail and maybe are interested. So this is going to be a vlog where I basically binge The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I have never read these and I have always wanted to, and I am a huge fan of the movies. I absolutely love, especially the original trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy movies. Like, I love those so much, and I've seen them a decent number of times, but I've never read the full series, and I've really wanted to, as I said, for a long time. So it is time. It is time. I'm here, I'm in the mood. I really want to read these. I really just want to be sucked into a world and be able to just dive in and enjoy a world. And I really think this is what I'm in the mood for right now. I have all 4 of the audiobooks on Audible with Rob Inglis narrating, and I've started The Hobbit, and he is a genius narrator. I absolutely love his narration. He does different voices for all of the characters and somehow manages to keep them straight. I think he delivers it absolutely perfectly, and the humor, the heart of the story, I really just feel like he understands that and is able to translate that with his voice and his performance, and it's brilliant. I love it, and I think these could end up being some of my favorite audiobooks that I listened to this year. So I'm 90 pages in, I think, yeah, 90 pages into The Hobbit, and I just love it. I love it so much. I love the writing style, actually, and I love just the humor, the quirkiness. It's like slightly quirky. It's definitely an old school, I'm gonna sit down and tell you a bed story about this great adventure that someone else went on. And so it's told in that kind of narration style. It really just feels, you know, like it could be a classic forever. Like, it just feels so out of time and just feels, you know, it's just a delight. Like, it's pretty whimsical, and I think this is targeted towards a younger age potentially, from what I understand, than the rest of the series, but it's just so delightful and magical, and it really does feel like you're just telling kids a story before bed, and it's so much fun so far. I really love it. So far it's really just been the classic scene of Gandalf coming to meet Bilbo Baggins at his house, and then, you know, talking to him about this adventure, and he basically says, no, I don't want to go on an adventure. I'm a hobbit. That's not what we do. And, you know, the next day a bunch of dwarfs start coming to his house and gathering and telling him about this adventure that he's going to be going on. And so he kind of gets roped into an adventure to go to see, there are some dragons, a dragon named Smaug, who is basically sitting on a bunch of gold and treasures that these dwarves claim used to be theirs, and they want them back. And so they're going to go find this dragon, and they're going to go on an adventure to get these treasures back. And they meet different creatures along the way. They've met some trolls, they've met some goblins, you know, Bilbo has met Gollum at this point, and you know, it's just everything. It's just everything. I love it. So I'll check back when I've read more of The Hobbit. Okay, so it is Friday, March 12th, so it's been a second since I've checked in. My bad. But I have finished The Hobbit, and honestly, freaking love this. So as I mentioned before, I'm listening to the audiobooks, which I would highly recommend. These audiobooks are so much fun, and I'm going to continue to listen to the rest of them since I have all of them on Audible. I absolutely adore the writing. It's a very different writing style than I'm used to, or that I tend to like. And not that that's a bad thing. I really enjoyed the writing. It's super just whimsical and fun and charming, and I really enjoy the humor in this. And it's definitely a very distinct writing style though, and I think I've mentioned kind of the narration style of, it feels like you're telling your kid a bedtime story about someone else's adventures. So the narrator very occasionally interjects their thoughts, but they're telling someone else's story. And it's in part that, and in part some of the other writing style choices that make you feel like you're not necessarily there on the ground with the hobbits and the dwarves going on this adventure. You feel like you're kind of flying above them, just kind of peering in just to check in and see what's going on, which is a very different feeling than I usually have in a book. I usually feel like it, you know, if the writing style typically achieves, you know, what I want it to, I typically feel like I'm right there with the characters on the ground, that I'm standing with them and I can look around and interact with them and see what they're doing. But it didn't really feel like that, which is, again, not a bad thing. That sounds like a bad thing, but it's not a bad thing. It just felt very different. But I still thoroughly enjoy the writing style and the charm and the whimsy. I love Bilbo. Bilbo is just such a heartwarming character who is just extremely kind and loyal, and, you know, just a good-natured, humble character who definitely has a lot to learn. But it was just such a good, kind-hearted character. And Gandalf is also great in this. I thought Gandalf was hilarious in the scenes that he was in. The dwarves don't necessarily, there's so many of them, it's really hard to keep track, and honestly they don't feel like they have a very distinct personality, I guess. And, which is, I mean, they were still fun, but they're fun as a group. I didn't necessarily, you know, if you point to, like, what are the character traits of this particular dwarf versus another, like, I'm gonna have no idea. Like, he in general describes what dwarves are like, and you can kind of see that in some of the interactions throughout the story, but they don't necessarily have a very distinctive personality. But I do just absolutely adore the world building in this as well, and this is of course one of the things Tolkien is most known for in his books, is just his world building and just the details that he adds, and you feel like it's a super rich world, and I absolutely love that. I love rich world building, and so that was a ton of fun. I also just love the messages in here of just getting out of your comfort zone, learning about other people, accepting other people, you know, just being kind and humble. And it was just so much fun. It was so much fun. So I then just basically immediately continued into the Fellowship of the Rings, and this is actually a copy literally from the 1960s. This was printed 11 years after it was originally published. So I'm assuming that my grandparents had this probably, and which is kind of cool, and it's on my parents' shelves right now. But I immediately jumped into the Fellowship of the Ring, and I am over 300 pages into it. And so when I say that I've seen and enjoyed the movies, I've mostly seen and enjoyed the original trilogy. I have seen the Hobbit movies, but I've only seen them, I think, once in theaters, and were enjoyable enough, but didn't really get me the way the original trilogy did. So when I say I love the movies, I'm more thinking of these 3 movies. And I've seen them so many times. I don't know if anyone else did this, just freaking had Lord of the Rings marathons, extended editions, because you gotta commit, right? I had so many Lord of the Rings marathons with the extended editions of the movies that, I mean, I've seen it so many times, and I love the movies so dearly that it really is kind of interesting to read them now because I can, you know, when I picture it, I picture the movies, which some people might hate if they're a lover of books and want to be able to develop that picture in their own mind. But at the moment, I'm not minding that. I'm picturing a lot of what is happening, or I'm picturing kind of the aesthetic of the movie, and I'm picturing some of the characters who were in the movies, but not minding that. And of course, there are a lot of things that happen in here that don't happen in the movies, and so I'm filling that in my mind as well. But it's definitely interesting to see some of the differences and see which quotes were taken directly from the books, because again, I've seen the movie so many times that I can pick out which quotes were taken directly from the book, and so it's just kind of interesting to go along. I have very similar thoughts to The Hobbit as far as just enjoying the whimsy, the world building, the writing style just being very fun but unique and different to what I typically read. So I don't really have too many, you know, distinct thoughts as far as that. I feel very similarly to The Hobbit. I really adore our four main hobbits. I adore Frodo. Sam is just absolutely precious. And Gandalf is in this a little bit, you know, at the beginning, but of course kind of goes off goes off to learn more information. And I'm struggling with exactly how much to say. I figure for a good chunk of people who have wanted to read this, they've already read it, but I'm only just now reading these for the first time, and maybe there are other people who are fantasy fans who have wanted to read these for a long time but have just never sat down to read them. And so, you know, I'm struggling with how much to say without spoilers, and how much to say that does include spoilers. So I'm probably going to do as much of a mix as I can, but especially as I get later and later on, it's going to be hard to have new or distinct things to say that don't directly involve plot elements. And so I'll do the best that I can. If I am going to start talking about spoilers, I'll put a warning here or somewhere on the screen, so that you can at least skip over some parts if you really just don't want to hear any specifics. So I'm going to start with a few spoilers for Fellowship of the Ring, or some thoughts so far. These mostly stem from differences that I've noticed between the books and the movies. For example, how much time there was between Bilbo leaving the ring to Frodo and Gandalf helping facilitate the transfer of the ring from Bilbo to Frodo. And then him saying, keep it here, keep it safe, I need to go find out more information. And he leaves. It was like 17, 18 years before he came back. And then all of a sudden he's like, okay, we need to get the fuck out now. Which I thought was pretty funny, that he spent as much time away as he has trying to find more information. But, you know, he came back after a long time. I mean, Frodo was like 50 when he actually leaves to go take the ring back to Mordor. And he was 33 when Bilbo had his birthday party and left. Anyway, I just thought that was really funny. I also think it's hilarious that, so when Gandalf comes back and kind of describes what he fears the ring is and the power that it has, and he's describing how dangerous it is, but that someone needs to go take it back to Mordor, that is actually when Frodo says, I wish the ring had never come to me, like, I don't want to do this, like, I wish this had never happened. And that's actually when Gandalf says, you know, so do all live to see such times, but that's not for them to decide. They just need to decide what to do with the time that's given to them. I just thought it was so funny, because that moment in the movie happens after, like, a bit of the way in, after a bunch of stuff has already happened, and Frodo is very frustrated and scared. And, you know, it already happens then, but in the book it happens before he even leaves, and I'm like, dude, oh, you have no idea, honey, like, just wait. Just wait. Which I, again, just thought was pretty funny. And just some minor differences, you know, Gandalf actually telling Frodo to use Mr. Underhill's name. Of course, everything between Frodo leaving, like, he even meets the farmer in the book, which I thought was awesome, you know, meeting the elves in between, him leaving the Shire and going to Bree and meeting some of the other folks. He meets Tom Bombadil, of course. You know, he has an entire set of places that he goes before he gets to Bree. But in the movie, they basically jump straight from the Shire to being chased to Bree into the Prancing Pony. Anyway, I also thought Gandalf's letter was interesting, and him basically saying, no, trust this random guy that you meet in an inn. Because that's something in the movies that I'm like, I mean, I feel like they would have been more suspicious, and they are very suspicious in the books of Aragorn, of Strider, and you know, I did think they would be more suspicious in the movies, but they are in the book, and it takes a letter from Gandalf to actually do that. Anyway, there are just so many little things that I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And they've made their way to Rivendell, so they're past Bree. The elves have come to kind of, you know, he's had that moment where he put on the ring and was stabbed on his arm, and was injured and taken to Rivendell with the assistance of some of the elves. And this actually was something that kind of, I was like, oh, that makes more sense, because in the movie the elves just kind of randomly appear and they say, like, we've kind of been tracking you. But in the books, the elves that he meets originally right after he leaves the Shire are the ones that basically sound the alarm that this adventure has started and that they might need the assistance of the elves. And that's kind of why they're on the lookout for the hobbits. Anyway, ramble. But it's just interesting to see some of those differences. And again, I'm just having such a fun time just being with these characters and being in this world. So I'm gonna stop rambling and I will check in at some point later. So I know it's been a minute since I've checked in. It is currently Sunday, March 21st. It's been a week, so I didn't really feel like checking in. We actually had to put our dog down earlier this week, so it's been a shitty week, and I haven't really felt like checking in recently, but I am feeling up to checking in now, so I figured I would do that and let you know that I have finished Fellowship of the Ring, and I'm actually a decent chunk into the Two Towers. I only have, I think, just 125 or so pages left of the Two Towers, so I'll probably finish that early this week, maybe tomorrow or something, who knows. But so I have made some decent progress this week despite it being a terrible week. Honestly, it's been a good escape to go into this world, and this is something that I really appreciate about fantasy, is that if you're just not feeling the best for whatever reason, that's part of why I love world building so much, and really rich and well done world building in fantasy, because it really can just feel like I'm escaping into a world. Even if the world is terrifying and terrible things are happening in the world, it can still be just an escape for me and just something to distract me a little bit from just the hole in my heart from my very big personality puppy no longer being here, or my parents' dog. But anyway, so it's been a good escape. But yeah, so as I mentioned, have finished the Fellowship of the Ring, and I didn't actually realize this, but it's kind of divided up so that you only follow Frodo and Sam throughout the latter part of the book, and the rest of the crew you follow in the first part of the book. It's not interspersed, or you're not going back and forth in these different perspectives as you are in the movie. And I just thought that was an interesting choice. It was kind of interesting to actually see the progression in the arc of Sam and Frodo's friends and follow, Merry and Pippin on their adventure, Gimli, Legolas, Aragorn on their adventure, and follow all of that the way through, and then go back and see what Frodo and Sam were doing in the meantime. As I mentioned for Fellowship of the Ring, it's been kind of interesting just to note the differences and the choices that were made in the movies. And as I continue going on, I'm even really just growing in my appreciation for the movies. Some people have felt that reading the books really or seeing the movies first and then reading the books kind of ruined the experience of one or the other. But honestly, I really feel like it's just increasing my appreciation for just how difficult it is to adapt something like this, and what a good job Peter Jackson did in the original trilogy adapting this, and some of the choices they made, and kind of understanding, okay, based on what I know is, based on some things that I know have happened, I can kind of see why they made some of these choices and what that actually provided in the movie, but I see why they might have changed a couple of things, or just kept to some of the classic lines, or just the heart of the books. I really feel like they just did a really good job capturing that. Anyway, so it's been kind of interesting to just note those differences, and I'm still having very similar feelings as far as just really enjoying the world and the world building. You can just sink your teeth into this world, and you really can just get, even absent, although to be fair, like part of it is me envisioning parts of the movie, but like you really can just envision everything that is going on in this world, and just the different creatures they meet and the different surroundings out there. And part of it is that he just spends a lot of time describing these things, and for some people that's boring, but I have just really enjoyed it because I tend to love world building. And again, I think this is a story that is meant to be told to you. So listening to the audiobooks, I think, has just truly been the way to go, because I think these are stories meant to be told out loud and told to you. I think is just with the style of the writing, just what is being built in your head, I don't know, it's really made a huge difference, I think. And it's still interesting, the writing style is still just definitely very interesting, and something that took a second to get into or used to, but I mean, I don't tend to read books with super formal writing styles, or I guess kind of this kind of writing style. And there are of course some just very interesting choices of how he decides to tell the story, and I think I've kind of described it before in the clips that I've done for this vlog, of it feels like you're above them, kind of hovering above them, just kind of looking down, watching what's going on with these groups, but it's a little bit difficult to feel like you know the characters, because the only way you actually do get to know them in a sense is through some of their dialogue and through some of their actions, but you don't often know what they're thinking. There are of course occasions where Tolkien will specify this is what this character was thinking in this moment, but didn't say aloud. But it's very difficult to get into the head of the characters and really feel like you understand them, or feel like you know how different and distinct and diverse these characters are, just in terms of, I guess, just who they are and their thought processes and how they approach life based on the different cultures that they come from, or the different groups that they come from. But it's honestly not detracting from my enjoyment of the story, because I think the point is just to sit in these places and sit in these moments with these characters and just follow some of the interesting things happening throughout this world. Anyway, so I think mostly so far been able to keep it spoiler free for Two Towers. I know there was a part where I kind of talked some of the specifics of the Fellowship of the Ring and some of the thoughts about some specific things happening. I might do that a little bit later. I've been keeping notes, but mostly just on some things I've noticed about choices that the movie's made and differences, just because that's what's popping into my head during this read. But I will probably come back later with potentially just some more specific thoughts about some of the different elements in this story, the plot elements in this story, but I don't want to do that at the moment, so I'll probably come back later once I have finished Two Towers. Maybe I'll be a bit in the way, maybe I'll be a bit into the Return of the King by the time I do that, who knows. But yeah, I will check back in later. So it is way later than I meant to check in, and I realized as I was editing the clips in this vlog that I never checked in after the last part of the Two Towers, or at any point while I was reading The Return of the King. But I'm done with the trilogy. So oops, part of the struggle of, instead of doing weekly reading vlogs where I at least have somewhat of a schedule and a structure to that, that's one of the challenges of trying to check in when it makes sense with my reading, and checking in more randomly, I guess, instead of a little bit more consistently, is sometimes it's just a little bit easier to put off, I guess. I don't know, something I'll need to work on for other vlogs that I'll be doing in the future, but you know, it is what it is. And so I wanted to wrap up this vlog. It's already longer than I thought it would be, so I'm going to try to be somewhat brief. My overall non-spoiler thoughts for the very end of The Two Towers and the rest of The Return of the King are remarkably similar to what I've already said for The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and the first part of The Two Towers. It remains just whimsical and charming and just interesting and just a fascinating world to be in, and I had such a fun time with this entire trilogy. And it did take a while to get used to the writing style, I guess I would say. I think some characters that I didn't feel I knew very well because there was quite a bit of telling and not showing with some of the characters. And another interesting story element that was kind of related, that was used relatively frequently throughout the books, is even though we're kind of all over the place in terms of the geography of this world and we can see a lot of different stuff happening in different parts of the world, there still are quite a few instances where we know something is happening in another part of the world with different characters, but we don't hear about some of the details until they meet up with some of the other characters later, and then a character will be like, so what happened with this thing? And the character will be like, let me tell you the story now. Which is an interesting way of doing that. Of course, there is still plenty of actual action and things happening that we're following, but it was definitely interesting to, you know, want to see some of the things that we know are happening, but there were a few of them that we didn't actually see, and we only heard the story of them later through them, through whoever was the main person acting in that capacity, them talking to other characters later and telling the story secondhand. Or not secondhand, but like telling the story later, and like, so we know what happened through that telling rather than, you know, the narrator describing the action. Overall, such a good time. I think I'm just gonna talk about a few spoilery things to wrap up, and otherwise I'm gonna, yeah, I'll try to keep this very brief too because this video is already long enough. But yeah, so a few spoilery things. So I kind of left off towards the end of The Two Towers and didn't really talk a ton about some spoilery thoughts for The Two Towers. And it was kind of interesting for, there are a few times throughout The Two Towers and The Return of the King where there are some tense moments in the movies that don't actually happen in the books, or they happen slightly differently in the books. For example, when they're going in the marsh, I think Frodo doesn't actually fall in, if I remember right. Like they see what's going on in the marsh and they know what it is, and Gollum tells them what's going on, but I was fully expecting Frodo to actually fall in. Another moment was Sam confronting Gollum when he first starts overhearing Gollum and Smeagol kind of having arguments or conversations, I guess. And you know, in the movie he full on confronts Gollum and says, this is what I overheard, and tells Frodo, this is what I overheard, he means to kill us. But in the book kept it to himself that he heard what was going on so that he could just know to keep a closer eye, but not let Gollum know that he was as suspicious as he was, even though Sam and Gollum never really got along, let's say. And especially, and later on too, so there were quite a few moments with Frodo and Sam for this, and especially later on when Faramir finds them after they're looking at the elephants, and in the movie he straight up takes them and they don't really want to go with him. You know, they kind of understand what's going on, but Faramir takes them against their will, and in the books and there's a bunch of stuff that happens between them and Faramir, but in the books there's much less confrontation there. They are blindfolded for part of it, but they do willingly go and are willingly blindfolded, and there's quite a bit that happens where there's a lot more goodwill there than in the movies, because I guess they wanted to have another, I guess, moment of tension. And there's also you know, some stuff in Mordor in Return of the King when they're around and walking around in Mordor, and there is a point in the book where they're actually walking with some of the rest of the orcs in Mordor, but where they have to dress up and walk alongside some, but there's not actually a fight. They have to pause as some other groups of orcs are coming together, and then they just kind of slip off as there's a bunch of stuff going on, but they don't actually have a fight or a confrontation between the two of them to cause a distraction and then slip away. Anyway, it was interesting to see some of the added moments of tension that aren't necessarily in the books, and also added a bunch of added romantic elements that are only kind of sort of hinted at in the books, but aren't really a huge part at all. But you know, those are to be expected, I guess. I think for Merry and Pippin too, in their adventure, as they were taken by some of the orcs towards the beginning of Two Tower, their escape back into the forest also was a little bit slower, it seemed, in the book than in the movie, and I don't think they were chased into the forest. I mean, they were escaping a battle scene, but I don't remember, at least I took note and was like, I don't think there was actually an orc straight up chasing them into Fangorn Forest. Treebeard is so great though. I mean, he's great in the movie, but he's also so great in the books. And that was another difference too, was how like Treebeard didn't really need to be convinced to help, and that was another, I guess, added moment of tension in the movies, was whether or not Merry and Pippin would be able to convince Treebeard to get the Ents to help. And you know, Treebeard is pretty on board from the beginning once he figures out who they are and what's going on, and you know, had some suspicions about what's going on and who's playing a role. He didn't need much convincing. He was like, I'm gonna talk to the Ents, we're gonna help, we're gonna take on Isengard, like screw Sauron. And yeah, anyway, there are also the endings too. Oh my god, you thought the movie had a bunch of long endings? The book took so long to end at the Return of the King. Of course, it's nice to see their return adventure because we've gone on such a long journey with them to get there. It's nice to actually see them go back and see them go back to the Shire. And oh my god, they checked in with everyone on their way back, right? Like, they check back in with the elves, they check back in with Treebeard, they go and see Saruman again, they try to go and see Tom Bombadil again, you know, they talk to the innkeeper in Bree for a long time and they hang out there for a little while. Like, they take their time coming back and they're just updating the people that they've met along the way, and they're like, yo, we finished this journey, we're good, we got this. And then they get back to the Shire, and it's not just them, you know, returning back to the Shire and kind of going back to life as normal. They have, like, Saruman and some other people have kind of taken a hold of parts of the Shire, and so there's an entire part where there are some, you know, some ruffians that they need to take care of in the Shire and reclaim the Shire. And that was a whole thing. Like, it was a lot at the ending. Like, they even cut out so much of the ending, and it still felt like the movies took a while to actually wrap up and end some of these storylines, but they cut out a lot from the endings in the book. But anyway, I'm just gonna wrap it up here and just say that I absolutely adored this adventure from start to finish and had a good time. So if you love world building, if you're down with unique techniques of storytelling, I think it's such a fun adventure. And thank you so much if you watched this entire thing and heard my super rambly thoughts about the Lord of the Rings series. This will definitely be one that I treasure for a long time. So thank you so much. I will be sure to leave my Twitter and Instagram link down below. That's where I like to hang out. I will also leave more information about how you can support the Black Lives Matter movement, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.